There comes a moment in every meaningful connection where everything slows down not because the world stops, but because something deeper demands attention. A moment where distractions, assumptions, and defenses need to fade, and truth needs space to breathe. My love, if you truly care about me, please just listen for a moment. Not with the intention to reply, not with the instinct to correct, but with the willingness to understand something that may not be immediately comfortable, yet deeply important. Because what I'm sharing isn't just a collection of thoughts, it's a reflection of what I've been carrying inside, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to be heard. We live in a world where speed is rewarded. Fast replies, quick judgments, instant reactions. But meaningful relationships don't operate on speed, they operate on depth. And depth requires something rare: presence. Presence means you're here, fully. Not halfway between your thoughts and my words. Not distracted by what you want to say next, but completely engaged in understanding what is being expressed. And here's the truth most people overlook. Listening is not passive. It's an active, intentional act. It requires discipline. It requires empathy. It requires you to temporarily set aside your own perspective and step into someone else's reality. If you truly care about me, then recognize this: what I feel is not an inconvenience. It's not something to brush aside or minimize. It's a signal, a message, a doorway into understanding me on a deeper level. I'm not asking you to always agree. Agreement is easy. Understanding is powerful. There's a difference between hearing words and receiving meaning. Words are surface level. Meaning lies underneath in tone and pauses and what is said and what is left unsaid. And when you miss that, you don't just miss the message, you miss me. Vulnerability is not something I offer lightly. It's not easy to open up, to expose thoughts that could be misunderstood, or feelings that could be dismissed. But I'm choosing to do it anyway. Because I believe that what we're building deserves honesty, and honesty requires courage. But courage alone is not enough. It needs to be met with awareness, with respect, with the willingness to truly listen. Because when vulnerability meets indifference, something breaks. Not instantly, but gradually. Trust begins to weaken. Connection starts to fade. And over time, what once felt strong becomes fragile. But when vulnerability meets understanding, something extraordinary happens. There's alignment. There's clarity. There's a sense that you're not alone in what you feel. That's what I'm asking for. Not perfection, not flawless communication, just effort. Real, conscious effort to understand before reacting, because reactions are easy. They come from habit, from ego, from defense, but understanding, that comes from intention. It comes from pausing for a second longer, from asking one more question, from choosing curiosity over assumption. And those small choices, they define everything. They determine whether we grow together or slowly drift apart without even realizing it. You see, love isn't sustained by intensity. It's sustained by consistency, by the repeated decision to show up, to care, to listen even when it's not convenient, especially when it's not convenient. So in this moment, I'm not asking for something impossible. I'm asking for something simple, but powerful. Be here. Listen not just to respond, but to understand. Not just to hear words, but to feel their meaning. Because this moment, as small as it seems, carries weight. It carries the potential to strengthen what we have or weaken it. And if you truly care about me, then you'll understand that listening is not a small act. It's everything. The power of truly listening without interruption or judgment is something most people underestimate. Yet it is one of the most transformative forces in any relationship. It sounds simple, just listen, but in reality, it is one of the rarest skills in the world. Because true listening is not just about staying silent while the other person speaks. It's about being fully present mentally and emotionally, without trying to control, interrupt, or reshape what is being said. When someone speaks to you from the heart, they are doing something incredibly significant. They are choosing to reveal a part of themselves that is not always visible. That moment carries weight. It carries trust. And how you respond in that moment determines whether that trust grows stronger or quietly begins to disappear. Most people don't interrupt with their words, they interrupt with their minds. While the other person is speaking, they're already preparing a response, building a defense, or deciding whether they agree or disagree. But in doing that, they miss the essence of what is being shared. They hear the words, but they don't receive the meaning. And meaning is everything. To truly listen, you have to let go of the need to be right. You have to release the instinct to correct or fix, because not every expression is a problem that needs solving. Sometimes it's simply a feeling that needs to be understood. There's a quiet discipline in that, a kind of strength that doesn't show itself through dominance or control, but through patience, through the ability to pause your own thoughts and create space for someone else's reality. Think about it: how often do people feel unheard even when they are speaking? How often do conversations turn into silent battles of who gets the final word instead of shared moments of understanding? That's because listening without judgment requires something deeper than just attention. It requires empathy. It requires you to step outside your own perspective and temporarily live in someone else's experience. And that's not easy, because judgment is automatic, it's fast, it's built into the way we process the world. But real connection doesn't come from automatic reactions. It comes from conscious choices. When you choose not to judge, you create a safe space. A space where honesty can exist without fear. A space where someone doesn't have to filter their thoughts or dilute their emotions just to be accepted. And in that space, something powerful happens. People open up, walls come down, conversations become real. Without that space, communication becomes guarded. People start saying only what feels safe, not what is true. And when truth disappears, connection becomes superficial. But when you listen, truly listen, you send a message without saying a single word. You say, "You matter, your thoughts matter, your feelings are worth my time and attention." That message is more powerful than any advice or solution you could offer. Because at the core of every human being is a simple need to be understood, not fixed, not judged, understood. And when someone feels understood, something shifts inside them. They become calmer, clearer, more open. The need to defend themselves disappears because they no longer feel under attack. This is where real communication begins, not in talking, but in listening. It's easy to speak, it's easy to react, but it takes awareness to listen without interruption. It takes emotional intelligence to listen without judgment. And that's what separates shallow connections from deep ones. If you can master this, if you can truly be present when someone is speaking, without rushing, without interrupting, without judging, you create something rare, something meaningful. You create trust. And trust is the foundation of everything that lasts. So the next time someone speaks to you, don't just hear them. Slow down your mind. Let go of the urge to respond immediately. Give them your full attention. Because in that moment, you're not just listening to words. You're holding a piece of someone's truth. And how you handle that truth defines the depth of your connection. Emotional honesty is the foundation of deep connection, is not just an idea, it's a principle. That determines whether a relationship remains surface level or evolves into something real, something unshakable. Most people believe connection is built through time, shared experiences, or constant communication. But those things without honesty are just structure without substance. Emotional honesty is the substance. It begins with a simple but difficult act, telling the truth about what you actually feel, not what is convenient to say. And that's where most people struggle, because honesty requires exposure. It requires you to step out from behind the image you've carefully maintained and say, "This is what's really going on inside me." That level of openness is uncomfortable. It challenges the ego. It risks misunderstanding. It opens the door to rejection. And because of that, many people choose a safer path. They filter their emotions. They soften their truth. They hide behind silence or vague words. But here's the cost of that safety: disconnection. When you are not emotionally honest, the other person doesn't actually know you. They only know a version of you, a controlled, edited version designed to avoid conflict or discomfort. And while that might keep things smooth on the surface, it slowly erodes the depth of the relationship. Because real connection doesn't grow in comfort zones. It grows in truth. Emotional honesty means saying, "This hurt me," even when it's easier to pretend it didn't. It means admitting, "I'm afraid," when everything in you wants to appear strong. It means expressing, "I need more from this," even when you worry about how it will be received. And here's the paradox. The more honest you are, the more vulnerable you become, but also, the stronger the connection has the potential to be. Why? Because honesty creates clarity. Without clarity, people operate on assumptions. They guess what the other person is feeling. They interpret actions based on incomplete information. And those assumptions often lead to misunderstandings, unnecessary conflict, and emotional distance. But when you are emotionally honest, you remove the guesswork. You replace confusion with understanding. You give the other person a clear view of your internal world or thoughts, your emotions, your intentions. And that clarity allows them to respond in a way that is aligned with reality, not assumption. However, emotional honesty is not just about expression. It's also about responsibility. It's not about blaming or accusing. It's not about using honesty as a weapon. True emotional honesty is grounded in awareness. It says, "This is how I feel," without turning it into, "This is your fault." That distinction is critical, because honesty without awareness can create conflict. But honesty with awareness builds connection. It invites dialogue instead of defensiveness. It opens a space where both people can share, reflect, and grow. And growth is the ultimate goal. A relationship that lacks emotional honesty becomes stagnant. It stays on the surface, repeating the same patterns, avoiding the same truths. But a relationship built on honesty evolves. It adapts. It strengthens over time because both people are committed to understanding, not just maintaining appearances. There's also a deeper dimension to this. When you are emotionally honest, you align with your own truth. You stop betraying your feelings just to keep peace. You stop carrying unspoken thoughts that slowly build into resentment. You become authentic not just with the other person, but with yourself. And that authenticity is powerful because you can't build a genuine connection with someone else if you're disconnected from your own emotions. So emotional honesty becomes a bridge not just between two people, but between who you are and how you express it. It requires courage, yes. It requires maturity. But most importantly, it requires intention. The intention to be real even when it's uncomfortable. The intention to prioritize truth over temporary ease. Because in the end, temporary comfort often leads to long-term distance. But honest moments, even difficult ones, create the foundation for something lasting, something resilient, something real. And that is what deep connection is built on. The difference between reacting and understanding is subtle on the surface but profound in its impact. It is the difference between repeating patterns and transforming them, between creating distance and building connection. Most people don't realize it, but in almost every conversation, especially emotional ones, they are faced with a choice: react instinctively or understand intentionally. Reaction is immediate. It's fast, automatic, and often driven by ego, past experiences, or unexamined emotions. It doesn't pause to ask questions. It doesn't seek clarity. It simply responds based on how something feels in the moment. And while that may feel natural, it often leads to misunderstanding. Understanding, on the other hand, is deliberate. It requires a pause. A moment where you resist the urge to jump to conclusions and instead choose to explore what is actually being said and, more importantly, what is being felt. That pause changes everything. Because most reactions are not responses to reality, they are responses to perception. You hear something, interpret it through your own lens, and then respond as if your interpretation is fact. But perception is not always accurate. It is shaped by your past, your fears, your expectations. So when you react without understanding, you're not responding to the person in front of you, you're responding to your own internal narrative, and that's where conflict begins. For example, someone expresses a concern, and instead of hearing the concern, you hear criticism. You feel attacked, so you defend. But in reality, they may not be attacking you at all, they may simply be trying to be heard. This is the cost of reaction. It distorts communication. Understanding requires something different. It requires curiosity. Instead of assuming, you ask. Instead of defending, you listen. Instead of rushing to respond, you take a moment to process. It sounds simple, but it's not easy, because understanding challenges the ego. It asks you to consider the possibility that your first interpretation might be incomplete or even wrong. It asks you to step outside your own perspective and consider another reality, and that takes discipline. But here's what most people don't realize. Understanding doesn't mean agreement. You don't have to agree with someone to understand them. You just have to be willing to see where they're coming from. That distinction is powerful. Because when people feel understood, they soften. Their defenses lower. The need to prove themselves disappears. And in that space, real conversation becomes possible. But when people feel misunderstood, they push harder. They repeat themselves. They escalate not because they want conflict, but because they want clarity. And if that clarity never comes, frustration builds. So the question becomes, do you want to win the moment or strengthen the connection? Reaction often tries to win. It tries to protect your position, your perspective, your sense of being right. But in doing so, it often loses something more valuable: the relationship. Understanding, however, focuses on alignment. It seeks to bridge the gap between two perspectives, not widen it. It prioritizes connection over control. And that's where growth happens. Because every time you choose understanding over reaction, you interrupt old patterns. You stop repeating cycles of miscommunication and start creating new patterns of awareness. You become more intentional, more grounded, more effective in how you communicate. There's also a deeper layer to this. When you practice understanding, you're not just improving your relationships or developing emotional intelligence. You're training yourself to respond with clarity instead of impulse, with awareness instead of assumption. And over time, that becomes your default. You stop reacting to every trigger. You stop taking things personally without reflection. You begin to see conversations not as threats, but as opportunities to learn something about the other person and about yourself. That shift is powerful because it changes not just how you communicate, but how you experience relationships altogether. So the next time you feel that immediate urge to react, pause just for a moment. Ask yourself, do I fully understand what's being said? If the answer is no, then don't react yet. Ask a question. Seek clarity. Slow the moment down. Because in that space between stimulus and response lies your power. And how you use that power determines whether you create conflict or connection. The importance of presence over empty words is something that becomes clear only when words begin to lose their meaning. In the beginning of any connection, words feel powerful, promises sound convincing, assurances feel comforting. I'm here for you. Do you matter to me? I understand. These phrases carry weight until they are repeated without being backed by action. Because over time, people don't believe what you say. They believe what you consistently show. Presence is not about being physically there. It's about being mentally, emotionally, and intentionally engaged in the moment you're sharing with someone. It's about giving your full attention, not divided, not distracted, not partial. Full, and that's rare. We live in a world where attention is constantly fragmented. Notifications, responsibilities, thoughts about the future, reflections on the past, all competing for space in your mind. So even when you're physically sitting next to someone, your mind could be somewhere else entirely. That's not presence, that's proximity. And there's a difference. You can be close to someone and still feel miles apart if your attention is not with them. If your responses are automatic. If your eyes are on them but your mind is somewhere else. Presence requires intention. It requires you to make a decision. In this moment, this person matters more than everything else competing for my attention. That decision changes the quality of the interaction completely. Because when you are truly present, you notice things you would normally miss. The slight change in tone, the hesitation before a sentence, the emotion behind the words. You begin to understand not just what is being said, but what is being felt. And that level of awareness cannot be faked. Empty words, on the other hand, are easy. They don't require attention. They don't require effort. They're often automatic responses, things people say because they think they should, not because they deeply mean them. I'm listening while scrolling through a phone. I care without making time. I understand without actually trying to. Over time, those words lose credibility. Not because they are inherently meaningless, but because they are not supported by presence. And when words lose credibility, trust begins to weaken. Because trust is not built on what you say once. It's built on what you consistently demonstrate. Presence is demonstration. It's showing up fully even when it's inconvenient. It's choosing to focus even when your mind wants to wander. It's putting aside distractions, not just physical ones, but internal ones, and saying, right now, you have my attention. That's powerful. Because attention is one of the most valuable things you can give someone. It's limited. It's finite. And when you give it fully, it communicates something deeper than words ever could. It says, you are important enough for me to be here. Completely. And people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who is half listening and someone who is fully engaged. They feel the difference between words that are spoken out of habit and actions that come from intention. This is where many connections begin to weaken, not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of presence. People assume that saying the right things is enough, but over time the other person starts to notice the gap between what is said and what is done. That gap creates doubt. Doubt leads to distance. And distance, if left unaddressed, becomes disconnection. But presence closes that gap. It aligns your words with your actions. It creates consistency. And consistency builds trust. There's also a deeper level to this. When you are present with someone, you are not just giving them your attention, you are giving them your awareness. You are seeing them as they are, in that moment, without filters, without assumptions. And that kind of attention allows real connection to form, because connection is not built in the past or the future. It's built in the now, not in what you promised to do later, not in what you said before, but in what you choose to do right now. So the next time you find yourself saying something meaningful, pause for a second and ask, am I fully present behind these words? Because if you are, even simple words will carry weight. And if you're not, even the most powerful words will feel empty. In the end, it's not about saying more. It's about being more aware, more intentional, more present. Because presence is the proof behind every word that truly matters. Building love through patience, respect, and conscious effort is not something that happens automatically, it's something that is engineered over time. Through repeated choices that most people overlook because they seem small, almost insignificant in the moment. But those small choices, when compounded, define whether a connection strengthens or slowly breaks down. Love is often misunderstood as a feeling, something that appears, grows, and sustains itself naturally. But feelings are unstable. They rise and fall. They are influenced by circumstances, moods, external pressures. If love were only a feeling, it would never last under pressure. Real love is built, and anything that is built requires intention. Patience is the first layer of that foundation. Not passive waiting, but active understanding that growth takes time, that people don't change instantly, that clarity doesn't always come in the moment. Patience is what allows space for mistakes without immediately turning them into conclusions. Without patience, every disagreement feels like a breaking point. Every misunderstanding feels like a sign that something is wrong at the core. But with patience, those same moments become opportunities to learn, to adjust, to understand each other more deeply. Patience slows everything down just enough for awareness to step in, and awareness changes how you respond. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin to ask, what's really happening here? Instead of jumping to conclusions, You give the situation room to unfold. You allow the other person to explain, to express, to be imperfect without immediately judging them for it. That's where respect enters. Respect is not just about being polite or avoiding harsh words. It's about how you hold the other person in your mind, especially in difficult moments. Do you still see their value when you're frustrated? Do you still consider their perspective when you disagree? Because it's easy to be respectful when things are going well. The real test is what happens when they're not. Respect means you don't weaponize their vulnerabilities. You don't use past mistakes as tools to win an argument. You don't dismiss their feelings just because you don't fully understand them. Instead, you recognize that their experience is real even if it's different from yours. That recognition creates stability. It creates a sense of safety where both people feel seen, not diminished. And that safety is essential for any lasting connection. But patience and respect alone are not enough. They need to be supported by conscious effort. Effort is what turns intention into reality. It's the consistent action behind the idea of love. It's what shows that you're not just hoping things will work, you're actively working to make them better. And here's where many people fall short. They rely on feelings to guide their effort. When they feel good, they show up. When they don't, they withdraw. But real love doesn't operate on convenience. It operates on commitment. Conscious effort means you choose to show up even when it's not easy. You choose to communicate even when it's uncomfortable. You choose to listen even when you're tired. You choose to understand even when your first instinct is to react. These choices may seem small in isolation, but over time, they create a pattern. And patterns define relationships. A pattern of patience creates stability. A pattern of respect builds trust. A pattern of effort strengthens connection. On the other hand, a pattern of impatience creates tension. A pattern of disrespect creates insecurity. A pattern of inconsistency creates doubt. So the question is not whether you feel love in a given moment. The question is, what patterns are you building? Because those patterns will determine the future of the connection far more than any temporary emotion. There's also something deeper happening here. When you consistently choose patience, respect, and effort, you're not just building a relationship, you're shaping your own character. You're training yourself to operate with awareness instead of impulse, with intention instead of habit. And that transformation reflects in every interaction. Love then becomes more than a connection between two people. It becomes a practice, a discipline, a continuous process of choosing what matters over what is easy. So if you truly want something real, something that lasts, don't rely on how you feel in the moment. Focus on what you consistently do. Be patient when it would be easier to rush to judgment. Be respectful when it would be easier to react. And put in the effort even when no one is watching, even when it's not acknowledged. Because in the end, love is not proven in words or feelings alone. It is proven in the quiet, repeated actions that show again and again that you are choosing this connection with intention.